Hello, everyone. Welcome to the As of Yet Unnamed podcast. I am Connor, joined as always
by Parth.
And welcome to our second episode. In this episode, it's going to be a continuation of our the last episode, where we're going to continue talking about some of our older unreleased material. There's 4 releases worth that we're going to try to fit in here and do a track by track breakdown, kind of like we did, same format as the last episode. We like to consider this kind of the middle era of Acid. This was where we were kind of starting to figure ourselves out as a band. It's definitely nowhere near as bad as the stuff on the last episode. It's listenable, at least, but it's still not as refined or just as well written as any of our newer stuff. All these songs are going to feature guitar and drums, although some of them will feature bass as well. Most of them are just going to be me and Parth, but Parth's cousin Unmill will make an appearance as well.
So we're going to start off with our 4th album, which was self-titled. It was called Acid. And this was recorded between winter 2011 and summer 2012. And this was a massive step above our last album, Game Over. I mean, pretty much on all fronts. The songwriting is a lot better. The production is much better and won't make your ears bleed. And on this album, we actually got access to a drum pad. We made an investment there, so the drums sound a lot better. Still not great, but definitely better than what we were doing previously.
The production on these albums is a little dry, very flat. We weren't really experienced with mixing or mastering or anything like that. Well, we were still trying to figure out how to record with a computer. And it improves over each album, but there's still nothing crazy going on with any of the production on here. It's just very cut and dry. As of this first album here, our self-titled, there are still some timing issues on the songs some songs that are pretty noticeable in places. Not nearly as bad as some of our old stuff where we weren't on beat for a single part of the song, but there'll be a couple parts where we get noticeably off time from each other. So kicking off the first song here on the album, we have a re-recording of our first song, The Room. This is pretty much just a flat step up in every regard. It has the drum pad drums, it has guitar and bass, and it's just a 37-second punk song, basically.
Yeah, this is just like a much more just improved version of the original Room. The production is miles better. It's basically the same thing. We didn't change anything, but it's just way more listenable. So our second song on this album is called Descent into the Abyss. And this was actually the first song where we used our drum pad. So that was kind of a big thing for us back then. And it's pretty solid. The songwriting is there. It's definitely got a lot more of that metal influence that starts coming in around this time. And it has some pretty decent riffs. Pretty solid, start to the album. Nothing offensively bad here. There's definitely a few timing issues in the bridge part. But overall, I think it's a good song.
It's a pretty good showcase of kind of what our sound would be like around this time. Kind of a straightforward heavy metal-ish. Kind of slower sometimes, maybe sludgy in points, but nothing too heavy. Just heavy metal, basically. And we were still trying to figure the production out here a little bit. I think there's some clipping issues towards the end, and maybe towards the beginning with the drums. But other than that, the production is like miles above anything else we'd had up to this point.
Right. I remember the bass kick in particular sounding just kind of wonky on this song. I think maybe it was too loud and it was causing some clipping or something. But overall it's a big improvement again from Game Over.
All right, so the third song on the album is called Shattered Frost. This is another song. It's kind of on the slower side. It's got some sludgier aspects to it. It's got some of those timing issues that are a little more noticeable I was talking about in points. And it's kind of just a collection of riffs we put back to back to back. There's no real cohesion between a lot of them. But it's still a solid listen. Some of the riffs are fun, and it's got like a bouncier part towards the end that's kind of fun. But I don't think it's one of the stronger songs on the album, really.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Connor. Those timing issues we mentioned are a lot more noticeable on this song, and it doesn't really feel like it flows that well. It just sounds like a collection of riffs. But again, there's nothing that just makes you want to turn off the song. It's fine for what it is. So the next song on this album is called Melodies Out of Thin Air Part 1. And this was actually a song me and my cousin Unnamed did on our own. Connor wasn't involved in this one. And honestly, I still think to this day that this one holds up pretty well. I think there are a lot of pretty well written riffs in this one. And it feels like everything's pretty much actually on time. And there's this actually kind of good solo at the end that I do. And also there's a drum solo in the middle of the song, which Unmil did, which sounds pretty cool. But the thing is, he overdubbed like 3 separate drum tracks to get this drum solo. I mean, you can't physically play this. You would need like 7 hands.
Yeah, you would need quite the setup. And maybe an assistant to be able to play this live.
Right. You can hear like the toms and the cymbal and the snare being hit at the same time. Like it's not possible.
It sounds cool though.
It does sound cool. It sounds pretty cool. And I remember he actually made me leave the room while he recorded this drum solo to like surprise me or something, I guess. I think it's a bit overkill these days, but I mean, it does sound cool. I can't lie.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the stronger songs on the album, I feel like. Like you said, there's no real timing issues on this one. There's a lot of like catchy riffs. It's more memorable than a lot of the other stuff on the album. It kind of sticks out in your mind with some of the riffs and stuff. And like you said, this is the album where our solos started improving a little bit more. You kind of figured out what you were doing a little bit more, even though I don't think you had really looked into anything like theory-wise at this point.
No.
But you were getting a much better feel for it, so the solos aren't nearly as ear-rattling as they could have been before this.
Yeah, I definitely still think it's one of the highlights of the album. Songwriting-wise, it's actually pretty good, I think.
All right, so the 5th song on the album is called Downturn. This was a mine and Parth original. This one's pretty heavy, actually, by this album's standards. There's a lot of really slow, kind of sludgy riffing, and some of the timing issues are there at the beginning a little bit, but not nearly as bad as something like Shattered Frost was. And towards the end of the song, there is a very heavy breakdown. It kind of surprises me that we were able to record something as heavy as it at this time. But it's a fun listen. I wouldn't say it's one of the better songs on the album, but I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I like it myself.
Yeah, this is pretty much the sludgiest song on this album, I would say. You can definitely hear that sludge influence here. And the riffs really aren't that great for most of the song, but the heaviness is there. And like Connor said, I love that breakdown at the end. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, just hits you in the face. It's kind of amazing, actually.
Yeah, it's a great way to end an otherwise not very noteworthy song.
Right. And fun fact, the title of the song Downturn is the name of a Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 map. So I don't know if that's where we got the name from, but
That might have been it, honestly. I think this probably would have been out around that time.
yeah.
So
So the next song we have is Melodies Out of Thin Air Part 2. And again, this is another one which me and my cousin Unmil did on our own. And really, it to me feels like a worse version of Melodies Out of Thin Air Part 1. The riffs are still there. There's some fun, catchy riffs, but I just don't think it's as well written as Part 1. It's still a good song. I would say it's probably about mid-tier for this album. And I think the ending is kind of cool where we kind of speed up this one riff a lot. But overall, I would just rather listen to Part 1 over this. I wouldn't really come back to this.
yeah, like you said, it's still a good song. It has some catchy riffing and stuff, but I feel like you used all your catchy riffs in the first song, and then in part one, and then part two, it's still good, but it just doesn't have quite the same impact. I don't remember as many of the riffs out of it as I do as in part one when I think back on the album, but I do think it ends pretty well with the speed up and everything. It was all on time, and it sounds pretty cool.
So the next song we have is called Time Machine. And once again, this is one that Unmil and I recorded at his house in Florida. So I actually still think that this song holds up pretty well. This has a lot of very catchy riffs, in my opinion. It definitely has a few production issues where the guitar tone just sounds a little flat in places. But it's just got so many kind of memorable riffs. I think it is a good song. And the drumming is pretty decent too.
Yeah, this one's probably one of the heaviest songs that you and Unmil did when y'all were working together. It's got a lot of heavy riffing. It's good riffing. It's catchy. And it's just a fun song to listen to. It's got a lot of energy. And like you said, the drums are pretty good. There's no unbelievable drum solos in this one, but it's still good to listen to. I believe this one is also one where we made the artistic decision to cut part of it that y'all did originally, is it not?
Yeah, it is. We added this little like 20-second interlude, I guess. I don't even really want to go into what it was. It was really stupid. But
it didn't fit with the rest of the song at all.
No.
So we decided to chop it.
Yeah, Connor made the executive decision to just take that part out, and that was a good choice.
It makes the song much better, I think.
Yeah.
Although that original version's still out there, and it's still just as funny.
Yeah, yep. We just kind of went back to that, like, game over mindset for, like, a little bit, I think. So... So the next song we have is called The Legend Born. And once again, this is one that Unmil and I did on our own. And this one is pretty solid. Again, it's got some pretty solid songwriting on the guitar. And the drumming is there too. We've got some solid drum beats. There's nothing about it that really stands out. There's not like one riff or one drum part that really makes you go, wow. But, it is what it needs to be. It doesn't really have the catchiness of the last song, Time Machine, or the riffs of Melodies Out of Thin Air Part 1. But I would say it's about mid-tier for this album.
Yeah, it's a solid listen, but like you said, nothing really sticks out about it. The riff that you use in the beginning comes back later, just sped up a little bit. So you're getting a lot of kind of the same riffs in there, just the tempo changes. But it's still a fun listen. Yeah, there's nothing bad about it. So coming in at number 9 on our first self-titled album is Rise of the Legend, which is the second song in the Legend trilogy here on the end of this album. This was a mine and Parth original. I like this one. It's got this really catchy kind of southern swingy-esque riff at the end that I really like. We were experimenting since we had the drum pad with some double bass parts, even though we couldn't actually play it. We were programming it with the drum pad, and I think that sounds pretty good towards the end. There's a double bass part with some nice riffs on top of it. But it's another kind of middle tier, I guess, in overall.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely got some. I feel like it kind of gets better as it goes on. There's some pretty strong riffs in the second half, like the ones Connor mentioned. The bass solo in the first half probably goes on for a little bit too long. Overall, though, I think I would probably put it in the top half of the album. Probably not like, top 3 or anything, but it's a solid song. I think it's probably the best out of the Legend trilogy.
It's kind of a spiritual successor to EIDE from our first album. It starts out the same way with the long bass solo that goes on for too long, like you said. But unlike EIDE, well, in the second half of this song, we knew what we were doing a bit better. Like you said, it picks up a lot more. The second half alone, I think, is probably in the top half of the album. I just wish the bass solo was a little shorter, so you could get to that quicker.
Right.
All right, and the 10th song on the album is The Legend Resurrected, the final song in the Legend trilogy. This song's noteworthy in that I was on guitar and Parth was on drums for this one. It was just the two of us, but we switched instruments. And you can tell I have a much different guitar style than Parth. It has kind of like very jam session-esque energy, especially towards the end. But it's got some fun parts. Nothing super memorable, but I mean, it's fun for what it is, which is showing off the difference in how we play the opposite instruments.
Yeah, Connor definitely has a much looser playing style on guitar than I do, and you can tell in this song. And like he said, it definitely has a very jam session-y vibe. Like there's no riffs that just jump out at you and you remember after listening to the song, but while you're listening to it, it's solid, good songwriting. I have this one drum solo also in the second half, which isn't bad, but maybe a little too flashy. I guess I took some influence from Unmill's drumming there. But yeah, I mean, overall, not a bad song, but pretty mid tier for this album.
And finishing out the album is the longest song on here, Armageddon. This is unique in that it features vocals from me. And they aren't quite as bad as anything on Game Over was, but I was still definitely working on it. Lyrics were written by Parth. And instrumentally, it starts off pretty strong. I really like the intro where we layered the guitars over top of each other, and it kind of builds to this big metalcore fast riff that it breaks into. And that's really fun. And then it gets to a breakdown, which starts off fun but goes on for way too long, and it builds up to this long extended solo that again goes on a little too long. But the first part of the song is still really fun, even to this day, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It starts off very strong, actually, I would say. There's some pretty good riffing there. The tempo we're playing at is kind of impressive. I would say everything through about the breakdown is really solid stuff, but then the breakdown keeps going for too long, and that extended solo at the end just wasn't necessary, in my opinion. The song should have ended like 2 minutes earlier than it did. But I mean, stylistically, you can hear where we would go with our sound on our next album for sure, with that kind of metalcore influence at the beginning. And overall, I also appreciate the vocals here, which you don't hear vocals on any of the other songs on this album. And I don't think the lyrics I wrote were that bad. I did an okay job. So overall, I would still probably put this in the top half of the album, but it would be stronger if it was just shorter.
It works really well as a closer. It just needs to be trimmed up a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So next up in this 4-album set is Skyline. This was recorded between spring of 2013 and summer of 2013. This is definitely the metalcore album through and through. There's lots of breakdowns and lots of metalcore riffing. There's some thrash influence in there, but overall it's a very breakdown heavy album. There's some pretty solid songs throughout. It's still fun to listen to today, I think. But the songwriting is not as good as it could be, and it does get kind of repetitive again with the breakdowns and some of the riffs. But it's still a fun listen. And Parth, I know he considered this to be our best album for a long time.
Oh yeah, for years I thought this was like the peak of acid, like the best thing we had recorded. It was my favorite album of ours for a while. Definitely not anymore. Like Connor said, I think some of these songs could have been written better. It's a little too breakdown heavy. I'm not really into that metalcore sound anymore, but it still has a lot of nostalgia, I would say.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun recording it and writing it. And even if I don't really want to listen to it anymore, I still have a lot of nostalgia for it.
So the first song we have on Skyline is called A Song. And this is actually a re-recording of one of our earlier songs from our second album, As of Yet Unknown. We decided to just re-record one of our old songs because we wanted to. And we actually used a lower tuning. We used drop C on this one instead of drop D in the original. And it's okay. I mean, it has better production, but it's literally the same song. We didn't change anything about it, the compositionally. So, I don't know. I still prefer the original because it just has that nostalgia there. And this just, I never really think about this song when I think of this album. It's a re recording. So, it's like we've already done this. We just played it again.
I think at this point we felt like our production was so much better, and we liked a song and another song we did later on this album, Heatwave, that we re-recorded. We just liked those two so much at the time that we wanted to make them sound better.
Yeah,
I think that was our general thought process, and I don't think the heavier tuning or the lower tuning really helps the song.
I don't think so either.
I think it hurts it more than anything. But it's the same song, so it's the same listen essentially as the original. It just doesn't have as much nostalgia, like you said. I don't think of this version. I always think of the original version.
Right. And like the original version had worse production, but somehow I think that adds to its charm.
Yeah,
And
part of
this,
the personality of it.
yeah, and this doesn't have that personality.
All right, and the second song on Skyline is Ascension. And this is noteworthy in that it's the only song on this album to feature Unmil. He did the drum part, I did the bass part, and Parth did the guitar part. We were all together here in Parth's basement studios for a single recording session. And I like this one. It's probably one of the strongest ones on the album. We're really on time and really together. There's a couple production issues, like at one point the bass gets noticeably lower in the mix, and it kind of throws the feeling of the song off a little bit. But the songwriting's really strong. I think there's some fun riffs on there and some back and forth between the bass and the guitar and stuff. And the drum part's really nice. Emil did a good job on the drum part. It's got a lot of energy and stuff.
Yeah, this is a pretty good one. The songwriting's definitely there, and we're playing pretty tightly. There's not really any timing issues. And I also have a solo in this song where I use the wah pedal, and it actually sounds pretty good. I use the wah pedal, efficiently. I don't overuse it. So it's a solid solo, and I really like how it ends too. It has this really kind of punchy riff, and it really ends on a strong note. So yeah, overall, I don't really have any complaints with this song.
It probably would have been the best song to start the album with, instead of
Yeah.
a song.
Yeah, this would definitely have been a better first song than a song. So track number 3 on Skyline is called Unstoppable Force, and this is where you really can hear the metalcore influence on this album. I remember the intro riff on this song was inspired by Between the Buried and Me. While we were recording, Connor played some Between the Buried and Me song from his laptop and said something like, "Here's some inspiration." And after hearing that, I wrote that intro riff. So that's a little fun fact. And I remember when we recorded this, I was super proud of it. I just thought like it had a lot of good riffs, and we have 2 breakdowns in this song, which I was really proud of both of them. And I just thought it had a ton of energy. We were on our A game.
Yeah.
But these days, it's not one of the highlights of the album, in my opinion. It's okay, but I don't know. I just don't really like this style of music that much anymore.
Yeah, this isn't really the kind of music I listen to anymore. And like you said, at the end of it, we have a breakdown into a breakdown, which is a bit overkill in my opinion nowadays. The first breakdown riff, is really bouncy. I still enjoy that one just because of how bouncy it is. But none of the other riffs in here really stick out all that much. And it's not particularly memorable, even if it's a pretty good representation of like what we were into at the time.
Right. It's pretty like standard metalcore. You know, it probably sounds a lot like any other metalcore song from like the 2000s.
Yep. All right, the fourth track on Skyline is the second re-recording. This is Heatwave, another song off of our second album, As of Yet Unknown. And much like the A Song re-recording, this one doesn't really do anything to improve on the original outside of the production. And it helps give some clarity to the distorted riffs at the beginning of the song. It's a little easier to tell what's happening on this version versus the original version. But my favorite thing about the original version is this long break that starts with a clean guitar with a lot of echo and reverb for the time that we put on it. And that's my favorite part of the original version. And this version really doesn't do it any justice. It's not nearly as good. And that's the highlight of the song. So this is just not that great a version of that song, even though the production's been improved so much.
Right. I pretty much echo everything Connor said. I feel very similarly about this as the re-recording of A Song. I mean, the production is better, and like Connor said, there's a bit more clarity in some of the faster riffs. But that break at the end, which was by far the highlight of the original version, just is not as good in this song, in this re-recording. I don't really know why. It's like the worst recording suited that break more. So
the lo-fi production enhanced that part. And when we cleaned it up, it just sounds kind of flat. It doesn't have the same impact as the original version.
Right. I don't feel the soul, in this re-recording.
Yeah, super soul, bluesy rock.
Yeah, for sure. So, I would never go back to this version. I'm going to go back to the original.
Yeah, same for me. There's nothing to come back to for this one. We didn't fix any of the problems with the song that were originally with it, like the repetitive songwriting or anything.
Yeah, it's literally the same thing over again. I don't think we should have had these re-recordings on this album. We should have just written 2 more original songs, in my opinion.
They would have fit the sound a lot better.
Right, because these don't really stylistically sound much like the other songs on the album.
Yeah.
So track number 5 on Skyline is called Ruina Magna. And this is, again, where that metalcore influence comes back pretty strong. I mean, literally like half of this song is a breakdown. I'm not exaggerating. And it's not one of the highlights of the album because it's so breakdown heavy. And there are a couple kind of cool riffs in the middle, but overall, there's just not much that's memorable about this song or super well written. I mean, you can clearly tell what kind of music we were listening to at this time. That the influence is there.
It's essentially a worse version of Unstoppable Force, in that it's just a very generic metalcore song. And it's a 3-minute and 52-second song where at least 2 minutes of it's just chugging, like breakdown chugging, just nonstop.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the end, we put a solo over top of it, but the solo is it's nothing stand out either.
Nope. Not one of my better solos.
No, this is in the bottom half, I think, of the album overall.
Yeah.
Definitely. So number 6 on Skyline is Relentless. And this is noteworthy in that it was written almost entirely by me before coming over for a recording session. I tabbed the whole song out except for a couple riffs at the end that Parth came up with. I tabbed the whole thing out in Guitar Pro so that Parth would be able to read it along and learn how to play it, because on the recording, Parth plays the guitar and I do the drum part, even though I wrote the guitar parts. And I don't mean to sound too self-indulgent, but this is probably my favorite song on the album, just because we lose a lot of that metalcore influence and it gets a lot thrashier. I like a lot of the riffs. I don't really know how I came up with them, but they're really thrashy and they're just catchy. And the breakdown on this song actually works really well and sounds really good. And it's not just a generic metalcore breakdown. It fits the song really well. And it's just strong songwriting. Probably the strongest top 2 songs on the album.
Right. Yeah, actually, I think I would call this the strongest song on the album these days. Like Connor said, he wrote pretty much all of the riffs, and I can't lie, they're really strong riffs. This is a lot less metalcore influence than the other songs, much thrashier, and it's just a good song. I would probably listen to this today, honestly. And that breakdown is amazing, honestly.
It just hits you. It smacks you over the head.
It really does. I mean, man. There's even this, like, harmonic note right before the breakdown, which was unintentional, but it fits so well.
It just sounds so perfect, and I have no idea how he did it. But
right.
It's probably the strongest part of the whole album.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, and coming in at the 7th spot, we have the filler track, Jam Medley, named such because it is a medley of jam sessions that me and Parth did. It's 18 minutes and 51 seconds long, which is about 18 minutes too long. And the only real noteworthy thing is that it's 3 back-to-back jam sessions that we faded into each other. And the first and the third one is me on guitar and Parth on drums, and the middle one is Parth on guitar and me on drums. So you can kind of, if you really wanted to sit down and listen to this monstrosity, you could kind of see the difference between our playing styles and everything. But there is nothing memorable. There's no like good riffs. Like it gets kind of fun at some parts in a way that a jam session's fun, but it's nothing that anybody would want to listen to.
Right. Yeah, I think this is a big waste of time. Like, no one wanted a 19-minute song on this metalcore album. We were super self-indulgent here, I think. We were just trying to make the runtime longer.
Yep.
And like Connor said, I think there was a few kind of fun parts, kind of fun riffs, but nothing that memorable. I mean, you're not gonna remember 90% of this. This is honestly one of the low points of the album.
Yeah.
Definitely one of like, I don't know, bottom three. I would put this in the bottom three.
Yeah. It's definitely in the low point, I think, of the runtime. Just because it's so long and such a waste of time. I mean, like, Ruina Magna is not great, but it's only less than 4 minutes. You don't have to sit through it for too long.
Right. I mean, man, this isn't that great.
No, it's just bad.
And the final song on our album Skyline is the title track called Skyline. And this is one that I pretty much wrote by myself. I remember coming up with these riffs and being super proud of them. And this is probably the fastest song on the album, and you can really hear that metalcore influence come back. That was a lot of what I was listening to at the time, so it definitely showed up here. I still think this is one of the highlights of the album. Probably top two. It's like in contention with Relentless for the top spot. And yeah, honestly, I think there's a lot of fun, energetic riffs here. The intro riff is pretty cool and kind of unique, I think. The drumming is on point. There's a lot of energy in the drumming. And towards the end, it kind of slows down. And I like that kind of change in tempo. And it just feels like a really good closer for the album. I think it's a strong note to go out on.
It's definitely the best example of that metalcore style that we were into at the time. The songwriting is good. It's not like, Unstoppable Force or Arena Magna where the songwriting's just kind of bleh. The riffs here are good. There's a lot of energy. It's longer. It's 4.5 minutes long, and not a lot of that time feels wasted. It's all fun. The breakdown towards the end, before it slows down, is really fun. I like that part.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really cool breakdown. And even though this isn't a style of music I'm super into anymore, I can still appreciate this song. I would definitely agree with it being second place, in my opinion, on the album. It's just it's a really good example of that style that we kind of associate this album with.
Yeah, I think for years I consider this song to be like the peak of what we've done, just the best thing we've ever recorded.
Yeah, Yeah, Parth had a lot of love for Skyline for a long time.
Oh yeah. So our sixth album we created was Inside the Chasm, and this was recorded throughout 2014. And really, out of all of the older Acid albums, I think both me and Connor consider this to be the best.
Yes, definitely.
This is where we got access to a 7-string guitar, so we started using much lower tunings. And even to this day, I think because of that, this is probably our heaviest album. And really, it's very consistent. The songwriting is very good throughout. There isn't really one song that stands out as a dud or anything. And one thing I will say is the production on the original version is garbage. Terrible.
Awful.
I mean, we started trying to experiment with EQ, and I think we just added way too much treble. So on the original version, the cymbals and the hi-hats are just way too loud and just make your ears bleed.
Yeah, it's it will hurt your ears if you listen to that version. It's just so loud and so overblown. We were like, well, metal bands use EQ and compression, so we'll just throw that on the whole track, not just like a specific instrument that needs it, like just the whole track, the master track. Why not?
Yeah.
And so it's just so loud, it's unlistenable. But I did go back and try my best to make it better. And so any clips you hear in the podcast will be from the remastered version that doesn't hurt your ears, hopefully.
Right. Connor went back and remastered the tracks pretty recently, and that version sounds much better.
Yeah, it's like Parth said. Once you can actually listen to it, this probably has our strongest songwriting. It's kind of a mix between sludge and groove metal, but it's got these super low heavy tunings that you would expect out of like a deathcore band or something maybe.
Right.
It's very strange, but it's probably our best from this time period, like by a long shot.
Yeah, by a long shot. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't have expected this kind of songwriting from us at that point, but I think just having those much lower tunings forced me to play slower. I couldn't just constantly chug playing in drop B or whatever.
Drop A.
Yeah. And it just made our songwriting better.
All right, kicking things off on Inside the Chasm is a track called Resurgence. This still has a lot of that Skyline kind of sound to it. The riffing's a lot more on the metalcore side in parts, but it's still a strong track, I feel like, even though it doesn't have a lot of the heaviness that some of the other tracks will have. It's still just a fun listen. It's not super long, but it's kind of got a good tempo and a good beat to it. And it's a fun way to start the album off.
Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty fun start to the album. I wouldn't say it's one of the highlights necessarily.
No.
But yeah, it's a good taste of what's to come. You know, there's some pretty fun riffs here, and you can hear that low tuning. So it's a nice change of pace. So track number 2 on Inside the Chasm is the title track called Inside the Chasm. And I think this is a step up from Resurgence. I think there's a lot of good riffs here that are pretty well written. There's also this intro riff we have where I kind of go back and forth between 2 notes and an octave. And then later, about halfway through the song, I come back with that same riff, but just way lower, a few octaves lower. And it just sounds so heavy.
It really kicks you when it comes in, because it's kind of we wrote it to showcase how low the tuning could go now, basically.
Right. And yeah, just throughout the song, there's just a bunch of good riffs. There's a nice riff to close out the song. And yeah, I feel like we were kind of just on our A game throughout this album, and I mean, this song isn't an exception.
Yeah. It's a good listen. It's like you said, that octave riff that we come back to. It's got like a good rhythm. You can it's got like a bounciness to it that's really fun, and that kind of carries throughout the whole song, even when things slow down and get heavier. And it's a good way to showcase the lower tunings. Again, I feel like that's kind of how we wrote it. We avoided the lowest string when playing that octave riff the first time, just so we could move down to it later in the song.
Right.
All right, so the third track on Inside the Chasm is Dark Spaces. And this is noteworthy in that it's the only track on the album where Parth plays the drums and I play the guitar part. And much like our other albums, this is noticeable. I have a different style than Parth, much different playing style, and I couldn't probably play most of these riffs today. I don't think I could figure them out now unless I really sat down and listened to it. But I like this song. Since I wrote a lot of the riffs for it. I wouldn't say it's one of the best on the album by any stretch, but there's this break in the middle that was pretty much improvised a lot of the way through that I think sounds really good. It's kind of got like a light black metal influence, which I think this was around the time I first discovered black metal, even if I wasn't super into it. So that's kind of cool looking back on that. But it's a track I have a lot of nostalgia for, even if it's not a highlight.
Yeah, I also enjoy Dark Spaces. As the name suggests, I think it's probably one of the darker songs on the album. You can definitely hear that distinct guitar playing style from Connor. Like, I wouldn't be able to write something like this. And I do really like that break in the middle where we improvise this like bridge kind of section. It's got a cool riff, and the drumming behind it is pretty solid too. And I really like how it ends too. It slows down a lot, and there's this pretty sludgy riff, and it's just kind of a good way to go out, I think.
Yeah, it ends strong, but not in the way that you would expect. It kind of just dies.
Yeah,
but it works.
It does. So track number 4 on Inside the Chasm is called Changing Times. And this is probably one of the heaviest songs on the album. This is notable because we used my Line 6 amp to record the guitar for this song. Because for some reason, we didn't have access to, I think, the mixer the night we recorded.
Yeah, it wasn't here for some reason.
Yeah, and there's kind of a lot of good riffs on this one. There's this nice chugging riff at the beginning that's just really nice and heavy. And later in the song, it kind of comes back, but it's like a slightly modified version. And I think that part works really well. And just throughout the song, I think the riff writing is pretty strong. The drumming is there too, to back it up. Probably one of the highlights of the album, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. The tone is definitely kind of the highlight. If you like tone, this is the song for you because it's just nice and thick and chunky, and the riffs fit it very well. They were written. It almost feels like we wrote these riffs after we found that tone because they just fit so well, and the drums give it that kind of extra punch. And it's definitely one of the heaviest tracks, I would say, and in my favorites. Looking at the whole track list overall.
Yeah, I agree.
When, like you said, when that variation on the intro riff comes back in, that's like a high point. I can hear that in my head distinctly. I like that part so much.
Yeah, probably one of the high points of the album.
All right, the fifth track on the track list is Abandoned. And this is, I believe, the first song we wrote coming off of Skyline. So that metalcore influence is most prominent here. I would say it's faster than a lot of the other tracks on here, and the riffing is a lot more in that same vein as what was on Skyline. Although it's still a little heavier. It fits with the album. It doesn't stand out like a sore thumb or anything, but it is a bit different stylistically. Although it's still a strong track, I feel.
This almost sounds to me like it could have been like a Skyline B-side, because a lot of the songwriting is similar to that. You can hear a bit of that metalcore influence, especially towards the end. But still, there's some pretty good riffs here. The songwriting's solid. I really like the final riff in the song. I think it's a good way to close it out. Definitely wouldn't say it's one of the highlights on the album, but there's just no weak track on the album, you know? I think they're all pretty solid.
There's no low tier. Everything's at least okay.
Right. Alright, so track number 6 on Inside the Chasm is called Scorched Earth. And the very low tuning is back with this one. It's definitely heavy.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, this is a good one. There's a lot of fun riffs throughout, I think. There's this fun little bouncy riff in the middle where, again, I'm going back and forth between two notes and an octave. And there's a nice strong riff to close the song out. I don't know, I don't have anything too specific to say about this one other than just solid songwriting throughout.
Yeah, it's full of good riffs. I like the breakdown in the middle. It's very heavy and chunky.
Oh, yeah.
And like Parth said, coming off the back end of that, there's this very bouncy octave riff that's really fun. And it's just a fun listen. I mean, we were on our A game as far as riff writing goes for this album. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I don't know. We were just kind of killing it on this album, you could say.
Yeah, not to self-indulge too much. All right, coming up next, we have a track called Venom, and this is one of the heaviest tracks on the album. It's very slow, very sludgy, very low-tuned. I like the riffs, though. It's super fun to listen to. The only weak spot, and kind of the weak spot of this album, I guess, is the solo at the end of it. Parth still hadn't really figured out how to solo yet, going off that feel,
Yeah.
pure feel, and it kind of shows.
Yeah.
But it's still not. It's not offensive or anything. But it's not the strongest way to close the song out, and that's a shame because the rest of the song I think is really strong.
Yeah, I like this one. I've kind of always had a bit of a soft spot for this one because of this almost like melodic riff about a minute and a half in that comes back at the end, which I think is pretty strong. And like Connor said, the songwriting is pretty strong throughout. The heaviness is there. That solo I do at the end is not it really. I mean, it's not really that well written or well performed. I don't think I really learned how to write a good guitar solo till like 2017. So at this point I was still kind of just winging it, and that shows.
Yeah, but it's the only real weak part of the album though, is the solos, and we didn't abuse the solos really on this album. It's not like we threw them all over the place.
Right. So yeah, I would say it's kind of one of the highlights on the album.
Definitely, in my opinion.
So track number 8 on Inside the Chasm is called Curse of the Sea. And I think this one is definitely a highlight of the album.
Oh yes, definitely.
I think just throughout the song, pretty much every riff is really well written. I really like this particular riff in the middle, which is one of the strongest on the album, I think. Just really well written and kind of bouncy. I also like the ending where we kind of play 3 variations of this riff, and it's just a really strong, in-your-face way to close out the song. We like the song so much we re-recorded it in like 2019, just because we wanted to. So
yeah. Like Parth said, a highlight, definitely. The riffs throughout are just really strong. It's got a good energy, and like the chemistry's there between us. It's just really well put together, I think. And the ending, like you said, is a super strong ending. Just really punchy and in your face way to stop the track. And it's just really good, like you said. I kind of like the new version better, even though I don't think it's out there anywhere. But this version here certainly has quite a lot of nostalgia, and I think the ending on this one might be better than the new version.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do prefer the new version too, I think, because it's just so punchy. But, I mean, this has some of the best songwriting on the whole album, I think.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And the final track on Inside the Chasm is called The Course of Redemption. And I think this is another really strong one. Lots of good riffs throughout. It's very groovy. Some pretty bouncy riffs in there. And towards the end in the second half, there's this one riff I've always really liked, which is kind of a build-up with the drums. It's just 2 chords, and I kind of go back and forth between them. But I just really like those chords, and I just think it sounds cool. And this really has an air of finality to it. Like, this feels like a closer for the album.
Oh, yeah.
The it ends on a very strong note. The riff right after that build up riff is also pretty strong, I think. And I end with a solo, which actually might be the best one on the album. It's not too bad.
Yeah, I think it might be the best solo on the album, definitely. You managed to stay in key
I do,
without knowing what a key is.
which is amazing at this point.
But yeah, like you said, this feels like the closer. It has a super super like final punch to it. It feels like the end of the album. All the riffs are very kind of bluesy and groovy and really good. Like they don't have that sludgy heavy sound that a lot of the rest of the album has, but it's definitely also not that metalcore sound like that you would expect from Skyline or Abandoned or something.
Right. This does have a bit of a bluesy feel and I guess less sludgy.
Yeah, and it's just really fun to listen to.
I'm glad this is the closer. It feels like it should be.
All right, the final album we're going to be talking about today is a forgettable release called Sepia. This was recorded between January of 2015 and August of 2016, which up until this point would have been our longest recording window. But that's only because we really didn't have a lot of time to meet up and record during this time. So even though it was over a year of time, there was barely any recording done in that year. It's another half and half release where me and Parth did a couple songs, and then Parth and Unnamed did the rest of the tracks. And it's very bland and just not very memorable. The songwriting's not super inspired sounding. I know I wasn't trying a whole bunch on these drum parts for some of these songs, just because this was a time where you were in Clemson, I was here in Rock Hill, so there was a distance issue. We couldn't hang out a lot, and I think our taste in music really kind of diverged here. And so there isn't a lot of cohesion with a lot of these songs. There's some nostalgia associated with them just for the time we had around this recording, but the songs themselves aren't really anything special.
Yeah, I agree. This just feels like the most insignificant and forgettable Acid album. I mean, at least the early albums were so bad that they're memorable, but I don't why was this recorded though,
Yeah, this could have just been canned. Like, we didn't even need to worry about making album art or anything for it. We could have just left it on the computer hard drive.
Right. And also stylistically, this album is it's all over the place because, like Connor said, it's a 50-50 split where the songs where me and Unmil recorded, those are more soft rock and just, not really metal at all. And then the ones me and Connor recorded are much more like hard rock and metal. So there's no cohesion. And none of these songs are memorable. They feel like they're lacking a soul.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it.
Yeah, I don't feel anything when I listen to these songs. Also, fun fact, I did design the album art for this album again after many years. And, I mean, it's okay, I guess. It's better than the old albums, but all I did was, take a picture of the ocean, and I added, a sepia-looking, filter to half of it.
Yeah.
And called it a day, pretty much. I thought it looked cool, but I don't know. It's fine.
It's like a callback to our old album art.
Yeah.
That's what we'll go with.
So the first song in Sepia is called Critical Miss, which is a very fitting title for, a song on this album.
The start of the album, no less.
Yeah. And yeah, it's not really a good song, to be honest. This almost feels like it could have been a B-side on Inside the Chasm because it has that same very low tuning and the songwriting is kind of similar. But if this was on Inside the Chasm, it would have been by far the worst song there.
Yep.
I remember even when I was writing these riffs, I think deep down I knew that I wasn't giving it my all. Like this wasn't my best work. I was just writing something so we could record something. And yeah, it's just not memorable and these riffs aren't that great.
Yeah. I mean, the only interesting thing about it really is that, I mean, we're using the clean guitar a lot at the beginning, which we would incorporate a lot later, kind of after we came back after this abomination of an album to actually try. We would start using clean guitar a lot more in a lot more interesting and kind of creative ways. But this just kind of feels like we just kicked the distortion off and just tried to write like we always do. Except we weren't really trying.
Yeah. Yeah, and like this lack of effort I think is for the most part just there throughout the album.
The reason this song is called Critical Miss is because at this time when we were all able to get together, me, Parth, and some of our friends were playing Pathfinder, a D&D like game. And of course, a critical miss is a term in tabletop gaming. So we decided to take that as the name for our song.
Yep.
And we also have one other reference to our specific game that'll come later in one of the other song titles.
Right. We'll get to that.
All right, so the second track on Sepia is called Into the Blue, and this is another mine and Parth original. Out of the stuff we did, this is probably the strongest.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of like a Skyline B-side almost. It's got a lot of metalcore feel to it that Inside the Chasm didn't really have. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of the riffs are kind of cool. It's got a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy behind the drum part. And there's some fast riffing and stuff. And it's just kind of okay. In my opinion. I think you like this one a lot more than I do.
I think I do. Honestly, songwriting wise, this is one of the best on the album in my opinion. I actually did put effort into this one. I remember writing these riffs like before we recorded the song on my own and being pretty proud of them. And even now, I think a lot of these riffs are like fun and kind of catchy. It does kind of have that Skyline metalcore feel, but not like it's not so strong where it's just like a continuous chugging or anything. And yeah, the production on this is kind of horrendous, though. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I think I was still doing what I was doing on the original version of Inside the Chasm. And so this has just got these super loud drum cymbals and hi-hats that just overpower the guitar to where it starts like dropping out. Like it gets hard to hear the guitar at points because the drums are so loud.
Right. So I actually like this song so much. I went back and re-recorded the whole thing on my own in like 2018 because I wanted like a listenable version of it. So yeah, I guess I have a soft spot for this one. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a great song or anything, but for this album, I think it's one of the better ones.
Oh yeah, definitely. Comparing it to everything else on here, I think it's in the top tier.
So the next song we have on Sepia is called "Swimming in Silence," and surprise, Unmil is back. So this one is one that me and my cousin Unmil recorded, and I don't know, it's okay. Stylistically, this doesn't sound anything like an acid song though. It's like soft rock, basically, like alternative rock. And honestly, I think some of these riffs are kind of well written, like towards the beginning. There is this distorted riff in the middle, which is straight up like a metalcore riff that's like completely out of place. But I mean, there's good songwriting here. And I remember being actually pretty proud of this one when we first recorded it. The production on here, I think, is too clean. Like, Uno has this very distinct, clean production style he likes to go for. And, like, a lot of, pretty much all of the songs we recorded recently. And, I don't know, it's not really my thing. So, I mean, that's fine. But, there's also, towards the end, there's this one riff that plays in the last maybe 20-25 seconds, which I think is actually pretty well written. I actually like that riff so much that we ended up reusing that exact riff in one of our newer albums, Distress Call.
Yep.
So, yeah.
That was a highlight of the song.
That was a highlight of the song.
It was such a good riff, we decided to use it on a good album.
Right.
But I mean, this song isn't bad. It's like you said, it doesn't feel like an acid song. I think the start of it's pretty strong. I like a lot of that clean guitar work at the beginning. That stuff sounded cool, even if it doesn't really sound like us.
Yeah.
Once the distortion comes in, though, it feels a little just eh. There's nothing super stand out about it. And again, like you said, the production's very sterile. That's the word I use for it. Very clean and sterile. And I'm not a big fan of that. But, I mean, it's just a different creative choice. I'm not saying that this sounds bad. It sounds very well produced.
Yeah, it does.
It's just not how I would produce it myself.
Right. It definitely sounds good. I guess I just prefer some of the heaviness. And the distorted tone on this is very flat and weak sounding and very quiet. So that's kind of a flaw too. I mean, overall, it's fine for what it is. It just doesn't sound like acid.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, the fourth song on Sepia is a track called Gus the Just, the Human, ? Which is another reference to our Pathfinder game. Our friend Jacob had a paladin named Gus. We called him the Just, and he was indeed a human.
Yep.
But anyway, this is another song that me and Parth did, and again, it's not super memorable.
No.
I don't think... it's so forgettable, in fact, that I forget that it exists. It's like a surprise every time I come back to this, that this song is here.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think this is another example of a song where you just don't hear any soul in the music on this album.
Yeah.
The riffs are all just very generic and kind of metalcore influenced. And yeah, I also forget we wrote this song. I have to be reminded of like, oh yeah, we wrote Gus to Just the Human.
That is something that we did.
Yeah, the very last riff in this song, I think is probably maybe the strongest in it. It's kind of cool. It's like this syncopated like start stop riff, and which is kind of sounds cool. But
It ends okay,
yeah,
but I mean, there's nothing else in the song to get you to that point. You'll have skipped it by the time the best part comes on.
right. I just I don't know. Maybe I thought I was trying when I wrote this song, but it just doesn't sound like I was putting in, my best effort. Track number 5 on Sepia is called Through the Mist, and this is another one that Unmil and I recorded by ourselves. And again, this sounds nothing like an acid song. It's very much, soft rock. Most of it has clean guitar, very subdued playing, and I don't know, it's okay. I think it starts off a little weak. It gets better in the second half. There's this actually kind of pretty decent guitar solo I have that's actually has some pretty good writing. But I don't know. This isn't acid. Like I keep saying that, but this isn't really what I imagine us writing. I feel like when I'm recording with him, for some reason my songwriting style just completely changed, and I ended up writing some just really soft stuff, much softer stuff. And I don't know, maybe I thought that since that's the type of music he's kind of more into, that's what he would want to play. So that maybe that's why there's this like stylistic like difference between our stuff and me and Connor's stuff.
This very much sounds a lot more in line with kind of what his band now is doing. Just,
Yeah.
I mean, his band is much better than this.
Yeah.
But it's more along that same lines of like soft alt rock. There is a nice solo, like you said, from you. That seemed well thought out and planned, and it actually stays in key and it goes with the music well and everything. That's probably the highlight of the song. But
Right.
it's just, to me, it's just kind of bland. And
Yeah.
like, we would eventually start to use like softer parts in our music later, but nothing that's...
They don't really sound like this.
Yeah, we took the idea of soft stuff from this, but we don't ever really use it like this album.
Right. This really does kind of sound like proto Mad Woman, Mad Woman being Unmil's current band. This isn't the acid I know.
Yeah, this isn't acid. This is a split. Split of acid and proto Mad Woman. All right, and the 6th track on Sepia is the final mine and Parth original on the album, called Renewal. And this is strange for us. It's a lot closer in line with what Parth and Unmil were doing at the time, with a lot of clean, soft guitar. And surprisingly enough, it reminds me stylistically of what our next album after this would be, Patchwork Landscape, at least in parts. It has some of the same ideas, but I don't think any of it's executed particularly well.
Yeah, I do agree where some parts of this remind me of what we would do on our next album, Patchwork Landscape. but just not executed as well. Like, I guess you can see some of the ideas starting to form there. But yeah, doesn't have that many strong riffs. Uh, Again, I don't think I was trying too hard here. Even while recording it, I think I knew, these riffs aren't really that great.
Yeah.
But
Well, that riff, like you said, that at the time you were even like, I don't think this riff is that good, but we'll put it in here anyway.
yeah, I remember when we were recording, there was this one riff I kind of had in the back of my mind for a long time that I never thought was really good enough to actually use, but I was like, let's just use this riff. I have it,
It'll
it's
make the
something.
song longer.
Yeah. So clearly it wasn't like my best work. I mean, both of us like struggle to remember this song, so again, it shows how forgettable this album is.
Yeah. Going back and listening to it now, I think it might be one of the better ones out of what we did, me and you.
Yeah,
But that's still not saying much.
right.
When I say better, I don't mean like 10 out of 10. I mean like maybe 6 on a good day.
Yeah, honestly, there is kind of some cool parts. Like, there's actually this guitar solo at the end over a clean guitar riff. I do kind of like that part. And the solo is actually, on key and well written. But overall, it's just like we kind of do this style of music better on the next album.
Yeah, for an entire album and
Yeah.
not just one song.
Right. So track number 7 on Sepia is another one that Unmill and I did by ourselves. And it is a cover of a Red Hot Chili Pepper song called Can't Stop.
Oh man.
I don't know. I think both of us, Red Hot Chili Peppers is a band that both of us are into, and I guess we just wanted to cover this song. And it's pretty pointless. Like, this doesn't even have vocals, man.
Yeah, there's no vocals. There's no bass. It's just the drums and the guitar part with a separate guitar part playing the vocal melody.
Yeah. Like, what?
What is this?
The guitar is doing the vocal part, and it's just like 2 notes, basically. We go back and forth between 2 notes for the vocals.
It just doesn't sound that good.
No. And again, the production is like super clean, which is fine, but it's not the acid production, I know.
Yeah.
It's got that Unmill Madwoman production on here.
Which again, that's not a bad thing. It's just not what we go for with our music now, really.
Right. So, I don't know. It's fine for what it is. It's well played, well produced, but I would never go back to this now.
Yeah, it just seems kind of pointless, kind of fillerish, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like you said, you played it well. The drum part is played well. The guitar parts are played well. And I mean, if you know the song Can't Stop and you listen to this, you would be able to immediately tell that that's what it is. Like, it's recognizable.
Right.
But why would you ever listen to it? I don't know.
Yeah, just listen to the original.
Yeah,
it's
go
way
listen
better.
to Red Hot Chili Peppers. All right, so the final track on Sepia is Yet another re-recording of an acid classic. Dreams Exist in Reality, off of our second album, As of Yet Unknown. Except this version is inferior in almost every way. This one is just Parth and Unmill. I was there for writing the original version, but this was one that him and Unmill did on their own to help fill this album out. And a lot of the more unique production choices from the original song are absent, and it just doesn't have the same feel or soul that the original one does. About the only improvement is that this like awful panning filter on the guitar solo in the original is gone in this one, thankfully. But everything else just feels so much more flat and lifeless.
Yeah, this is like if you took the original version of Dreams Exist in Reality and sucked out every ounce of feeling and soul and emotion from that. This feels extremely lifeless. Just the guitar tone is very kind of flat, and there's absolutely no effects on it. Any of the effects from the original, they're gone. The drums sound very like digitized, I guess, like clearly just
Programmed,
and,
yeah.
yeah. And I don't know, like, why would you ever listen to this version? I mean, I think I was pretty kind of proud of this when we made it, but over time, my opinion has morphed into Connor's, where I don't like this version at all. This was pointless. Why did we do this?
It's not a very good way to close out the album.
No.
Especially considering the song before this is a Red Hot Chili Peppers cover.
Right. I mean, it kind of hurts listening to this version.
Yeah, it's painful. I have so much like love for the original, just because it was so creative and original for us at the time.
Right.
And this is just taking everything about it and stomped it out.
Right. It's almost like you made a radio friendly, like mainstream version of Dreams Exist in Reality for like a record label or something.
Yeah, some like mass marketed produced music for the masses or something.
Yeah, because I guess it is more like, it's a lot more digestible than the original.
It's just not interesting.
No, not at all. No. And I think during this time, just to show like how the recording process was, like Uno and I, when we recorded, we were just doing our own thing. Connor really wasn't a part of it. Like, we would record songs and then I would send them to Connor and be like, by the way, we recorded this song for
hey, this will be on the next album.
Yeah, it's gonna be on our album that all three of us are on, but this has like nothing to do with you, and you had like no input in this.
Yeah.
And I think Connor just went along with it.
Yeah, I remember telling Parth that this version was all right back in the day, just because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. But I've always hated this version of Dreams Exist in Reality.
Yeah, I think he's very offended by this version.
Look what they did to my boy.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen his reaction when he first heard it. That would have been funny.
I don't think it was just a face of pure shock and horror.
Right. It's probably not too different from when I recorded vocals on Under a Psychedelic Sky.
Yeah, it's very similar feeling, yes, from my perspective.
Right. But that's the last song on this album, and thankfully this album's over.
Yeah.
This just feels like a very small like footnote in our history.
No one will ever talk about this ever again now that we've talked about it.
Right.
It's just that forgettable.
Right. After this, we go on to do like much better things.
Yeah. The music we released after this album is actually available online on our Bandcamp page.
Yeah.
Which maybe we'll link in the description of the podcast or something. But that music we probably won't be doing a podcast on since it's up for sale, but we're proud of it. It's leagues above. Even the first album on there, Patchwork Landscape, is leagues above anything you've heard on these 2 episodes of this podcast.
Right. We just I think we're both very proud of our newest music. It's just a step up in all regards from anything you've heard here.
Yeah. It's us being able to like finally realize like our artistic goals with our music instead of being limited by our instruments or our production. We actually took a lot of time and effort, and I learned how to produce better and mix and master better. Parth learned how to play much better.
Yeah.
And the songwriting's just so much better. And I'm not saying it's music for everybody. It's not very accessible music.
No.
But it's stuff that I'm proud of.
Yeah, same. It feels like we just put a lot more effort into our music these days, and I think it shows.
Yeah. I think it doesn't have as much of the fun factor anymore. It feels more workish, at least on my end, with a lot of the production and stuff. I still have fun doing it, but I do miss the days of being able to bang out 2 god-awful songs in a night.
Yeah.
Like amped up on Soda and Monster.
Yeah. We go get like a 12-pack of soda and 2 like gigantic monsters and drink it all and record some songs.
Yep. But I think that might bring us to the end of this episode. Unless there's any closing thoughts you wanted to add on anything we talked about.
No, not really. Just thank you guys for listening and going along on this journey with us.
Hope y'all had fun. Hopefully it was a good listen. And we'll be back next time at some time with something else.
Yep. We don't know what, but
we'll get there when we get there.
We will most likely be back someday.
Have a nice night.
See you later.